I'll call to order the meeting of the Ordinance Committee of the City Council of Santa Barbara, August 24th. Ms. Peterson, will you please call the roll?
Bendy White, Chair.
Here.
Grant House.
Here.
Frank Hotchkiss.
Here.
Thank you. And today we are here to discuss for the second time the concept of a spay-neuter ordinance. We have a proposed draft from staff, as well as we've received some proposals from the public. Do we have a staff report to begin with? Mr. Wiley, would you like to start?
Mr. Chair, yeah, I think it might be best if I give a short presentation. This, as you know, is a draft ordinance that two members of the council asked to be placed on the council agenda, and the city council referred it to the ordinance committee some time ago. The city, of course, has always licensed dogs, and it, in fact, I believe for many years, has had a license fee distinction between an unaltered dog and an altered dog. The altered dog fee being less. This ordinance is proposing to continue that distinction. In fact, I think it raises the logical question of whether that fee difference should be greater or not, in order to discourage the keeping of an unaltered dog. This ordinance, as you know, is patterned somewhat on an approach taken by the County of Santa Barbara that creates a process where a dog owner, if they wish to have an unaltered dog, would need to go to a veterinarian, and in the case of this ordinance as drafted, have the veterinarian sign a certificate that certifies that the vet has discussed with the pet owner, with the dog owner, the implications, the concerns, the problems that might arise in keeping an unaltered dog. And in fact, in my drafting of this certificate, which is fairly rough and in a way for discussion purposes, the certificate provides that the vet would provide some informational materials to the dog owner. I simply assume that those sorts of materials are available somewhere. So that, we shouldn't just assume that, but if we can find out that those sorts of materials are available, the concept does work. So the vet would discuss with the dog owner the problems, the concerns, and how to properly maintain an unaltered dog, and also provide him or her with these informational materials. And then, of course, the dog owner could not get a license for an unaltered dog without first providing this certificate, much like the rabies certificate is used. But unlike the rabies certificate, which, of course, rabies vaccination needs to be renewed on a regular basis, this, one-time thing, the ordinance does not provide for any kind of renewed. Once you do it for a certain dog, then you wouldn't have to do it again. The other thing about this ordinance is that it would include cats within its scope. As you know, I think the city has never licensed cats previously. And in order to create a mechanism for discouraging the keeping of an unaltered cat, this ordinance draft provides that all cats would be licensed. And I'll tell you, the theory there is that we really, an animal control officer would have a hard time telling an altered cat from an unaltered cat at a distance and maybe even up close. And but as with dogs, an animal control officer can tell if a pet has a license. They're required to have the license on a collar or in some form on the pet. So if we're going to say that unaltered cats must be licensed, and of course the owner must also have this certificate from a vet before they can get an unaltered license for a cat, it seems to me that you'd need to license all cats. And again, that fee distinction would be made just so that the animal control officer, just to realistically to think that there might be some way of enforcing this ordinance with respect to cats. I believe, well, one final point. As you may recall from the last ordinance committee meeting, it became somewhat apparent that the county approach has a bit of a judgment call in the certificate that the vet fills out, the county certificate. I believe I have that in front of me, but there was, if you will, an indication in that certificate that in signing it, the vet says, I think this owner is appropriate for, the sort of person that could handle an unaltered pet. That judgment call is not in this certificate. This certificate is more straightforward, if you will. It simply says, I, as a vet, have discussed with my client, I guess you call him, or my pet owner, that the problems, the implications, the needs of having an unaltered pet, and I provided them with this information, and the signature certifies that discussion occurred, but there's no judgment call involved.
Great. Thank you.
That's my summary.
Great. Well, thank you. Are there any questions, Mr. Wiley or Mr. Hotchkiss?
Yeah, I do. I think there's another difference between what we're suggesting here in the county also is that, as I read it anyway, the county advice is every time you go back to get a license, you're supposed to go to the veterinarian and he's supposed to talk to you again. And this time you're pretty careful to say, we're not going to lecture everybody every time over and over again, right?
That's correct.
Right. And I'm wondering, and I asked my cohorts this, there are people with multiple animals, cats particularly. This can get pretty expensive, and it's a first-time expense for them. As I figured it, I think it's as much as, well, it depends on the amount that we have for the license, but it's like $70 because the visit is generally is about $40 to a veterinarian, plus a shot, which is another $22.70, so we're up to $62.70 plus whatever, yeah, and change, and plus the cost of whatever we built in for the license, and that because cat shots last only, rabies shots, the duration is only a year. That's an annual cost. For a dog, it's different. The first time a dog gets a rabies shot, that lasts a year. Then he gets another rabies shot, and that lasts for 3 years. So the expenses, whatever we're talking about for dog owners, are a lot less. So if somebody has 3 or 4 cats, we're suddenly talking about $300 or $400 in addition to whatever other costs they may have. And that seems to me exorbitant. And I'm worried in this economy, people that are on a tight budget, they can afford that. So either they're not going to abide by it because it's too expensive, or they're going to have to get rid of some of the cats. And we're certainly not trying to discourage people from cat ownership. The only thing I could think of is there was, and this doesn't help a lot, but possibly a reduced fee if you have multiple cats. One license is this.
Okay.
Subsequent
What I asked is,
license.
let's have the questions now. We're going to have the public testimony, and then we can have position, okay?
Okay.
With questions like that, who needs positions, as they
Okay.
say? Anyway, any other
I gotta
questions?
hear your replies.
Any other questions you have?
I don't think so.
Okay. Mr. House?
I'm interested in knowing more, probably from our animal control officers, the idea of licensing all cats and in terms of the manageability of that. Could we just talk for just a moment about that? I noticed that as well, that was something that I don't think we asked for because it doesn't mirror what was in the county. The county was really talking about the unaltered cats. Considering that there's a problem of some sort where there's maybe lots of litters and it's just, and then you're in an enforcement mode. Is it necessary from your perspective for you to be able to do your job to enforce on an unaltered cat that's become problematic in the neighborhood to have all cats licensed? I mean, give me a little feedback on that because that was that expands the scope of what we were talking about with cats pretty significantly.
I'm Sergeant Riley Harwood. I oversee the animal control unit at the police department, and with me this afternoon is my lead animal control officer, Anthony Nunez. And our feeling is, with regard to practical ability to enforce the law, is consistent with what Mr. Wiley says. it's easy for us to enforce an all or nothing scenario. If you have a circumstance where some cats are licensed and some are not, on a practical day-to-day basis, it would become very difficult for us to enforce the law in the field. Now, maybe issuing citations after the fact, like at the animal shelter, sometimes that happens when people go to pick up their animals if they've been impounded. Enforcement could happen under those circumstances. But over the course of a regular day, our animal control officers only have a very limited amount of time to do proactive enforcement. Mm-hmm. They're going to and from calls for service and doing other responsibilities. And I do not, with our current staffing resources and current responsibilities, it would really be very, very difficult to be proactive to see a cat that was not wearing an obvious license and then to go and try and track that animal down and to inspect it. Right. So I don't see a lot of field enforcement.
Yeah, I was sort of more thinking that, well, we can discuss it more and hear from the public, but I was just thinking that your relationship to an owner of an unaltered cat would be when there was a problem, when there were litters that you go to a house, there's somebody has a call and there's cats all over the place and you're now in an enforcement mode for a whole other reason, and then you find out there's an unaltered cat that doesn't have a license. That would probably be your point of contact rather than we're policing for licenses on cats or something. Would that be more likely, the kind of situation?
You're exactly right. It would, in all likelihood, be some peripheral reason that caused us to investigate whether or not the cat was altered or licensed. Okay. Some other reason that would bring us to investigate that.
Okay, great. And then on the other side of that equation would be that the purpose of it was to give people a chance to be educated about what it means to have an unaltered cat, which if you have ever had one, you don't need much education, but there you are. Okay, so we'll hear what the public has to say. I just wanted to get their feedback on that. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. House. All right, we have 10 speakers, slips, and I appreciate your keeping your comments to 2 minutes. Starting with, so I'm opening the public participation part of this session. And Tom Freeman is our first speaker, and Dr. Lee Heller is next. Mr. Freeman?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I definitely feel the Ordinance Committee is making a serious misjudgment in supporting and forwarding this new ordinance to the City Council for vote. It will not save the lives of
Mr. Freeman?
animals.
Mr. Freeman?
Yes.
I failed to have the speaker this on for your opening of your speech, so please start over.
Can I get my time over too?
You bet.
Thank you. I definitely feel the Ordinance Committee is making a serious misjudgment in supporting and forwarding this spay-neuter ordinance to the City Council for vote, as it will not save the lives of helpless animals in the future, but will only cause more euthanasia. Even responsible pet owners will attempt to avoid the requirements of this ordinance by going out of county or by hiding their animals. Irresponsible individuals will either scoff at it or pay no attention at all, realizing a lack of policing capable to enforce such an ordinance. I spent the most frustrating year of my life while serving on this task force that railroaded this ordinance through because of a 6-to-5 imbalance of shelter people in favor, especially with Chair Dr. Farrow as chief engineer and architect with a strong background in mandatory styled legislature. MSNs in the past have proven ineffective and will cause more euthanasia, less licensing, and added expense to the city's already strapped budget. Since this ordinance is unproven, and in the light of many other already failed MSNs, chances are it will fail also. What this ordinance will accomplish is to make the already heavy workload of the dedicated shelter workers even more burdensome and discouraging. I stated once that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, referring to the good job the shelter workers are already accomplishing without a mandatory ordinance. While another public speaker stated that since it is broke, it does need fixing. I need to impress upon you that if this ordinance passes, it will only make the present already broke system even worse. I implore you, do not allow this ordinance to go forward, as it would be a huge mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Dr. Heller to be followed by Elaine Martin.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, nice to see you. I think I gave away my top copy too, so let me get that back. What you're getting are hard copies of material that's been emailed to you as well. And in the interests of brevity, since I have 2 minutes, the draft that's been circulated to the committee is sort of woefully inadequate. And it's a good starting point for us to have a conversation about what needs to be different. I'm going to summarize for you the difference between what you had from the city and what we're offering. The city requires a veterinary certificate to license both unaltered dogs and cats. It requires licensing for all cats, and it provides a preset certificate form. What we're suggesting instead in the draft ordinance that I've submitted to you is to require the veterinary certificate, only license unaltered cats, because to be honest, there's almost no enforcement in the field. Cats run away when officers approach and they don't get walked down the street on leash. So we don't anticipate animal control doing any enforcement unless they're dealing with cats confined and identified in a specific situation. And it's working just fine at the county. It would give the animal control supervisor control over the vet certificate. I've submitted the county's version to you, which was written and revised after input from stakeholders, particularly veterinarians, because they wanted to feel more comfortable with what they were certifying and less directive. It establishes multi-year licenses, which the city's already actually started, but wasn't in this draft. It includes disqualifications for certain kinds of pet owners. For example, if their animals are repeatedly at large and sighted. I don't think we want people whose intact dogs are running at large constantly to be allowed to keep them intact.
15 seconds.
Thank you. It does some other things I won't go into here, and I'm happy to answer additional questions, but I think we need much more detail and a much more comprehensive approach to this. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Ms. Heller, Dr. Heller, I'd like to ask you a question about, one of the issues that's raised, and you touched on it, is licensing of unaltered cats, but not all cats. Mm-hmm. That is your position.
Yes.
And the rationale behind that is that enforcement of that only would occur at the shelter, or what other situations like that?
Well, as I think was discussed between Councilmember House and Sergeant Harwood, if you're called to a house where there's obviously an excess of cats, say it's a hoarding situation or there are lots of cats running loose on a property, there's a greater likelihood that the officer is going to be inquiring about a specific cat. But if you are out in the world, you know that cats run away when you see them, if you see them at all. So an officer doing casual enforcement on the street with cats, I imagine that's rather unlikely. With dogs, if somebody's walking down the street with their dog on a leash or in a public place with it off leash. I also wanted to correct some misinformation for you, Councilmember Hotchkiss. Rabies vaccinations are good for cats for 3 years as well as for dogs. After the initial 1-year vaccination, it's the same protocol. We're also...
Question. I just called a vet today. Sorry. Let me ask a question. I just called a vet today, and they contradicted what you said. So why is there a difference?
You better change vets. Some of the older school vets still do annual vaccinations, but none of the more recently educated vets do annuals after the first year because the vaccines are good for 3 years.
For cats as well as
yes,
dogs?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I'm in contact with several veterinarians I work with closely. The president of ASAP is here. You can ask her as well. Peggy Langle is here. You can also ask her. And also, the cat license is not tied to the rabies vaccination in this ordinance or at the state level. So that issue really doesn't come up. The only thing someone would need to provide on cat licensing would be of an unaltered cat, and there'd be no licensing of altered cats, would be the veterinary certificate. I did want to add that we think a one-time provision of the veterinary certificate, is ill-chosen because circumstances change in the life of an animal. An animal that's been bred a lot and no longer looks fit to be bred again, a vet needs to be able to have that conversation with someone. A one-time certification doesn't reflect the changing circumstances.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I had a question. I just wanted to ask a real quick question, if I may.
Mr. House.
So my question was about how the frequency in your suggestion was not just one time, but how often?
Tied to the length of the license, because we don't want to inconvenience people unnecessarily. So if I...
Like a 3-year license?
If you have a 3-year license, you have a 3-year certificate. And since this county provides for a 3-year license, the city is now selling 2-year licenses, and may choose not that you would want to talk to Sergeant Harwood about what data feels comfortable doing. I had indicated that it would be a good idea to have a 3-year license, but if you wanted to limit it to 2, you're still adding some convenience for pet owners. I think 3 makes the most sense because it's tied to the life of the rabies vaccination for dog owners.
And what about exclusions, you mentioned there are two different kinds of exclusions. One is the kind where there's a problem where the dog has been maybe involved in altercations with other dogs, or I mean, or the parents of the dog. It's funny. The owners of the dog would be maybe they violated the law or something in some
Very
way.
specific laws related
But what
to
about
animal
the other
crimes.
kind of exclusion on the other side, like we say like seeing eye dogs, for instance? I mean, I've seen some lists of exclusions in other ordinances.
Those are mandatory spay-neuter ordinances that would otherwise mandate that the animal be
that's right.
fixed. We're not mandating that. You could still add that if you wanted, and say that a seeing eye dog doesn't even have to have a vet certificate. A lot of municipalities reduce or waive the license fee for assistance dogs, and you could choose to go that route. But most people with seeing eye pets are having to license them or visiting their vet every 3 years or more to get their vaccinations. They are mandated to have a vaccinated animal, so it shouldn't impose any additional burden on them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Elaine Martin to be followed by Lisa Kenyon. Elaine Martin.
Good afternoon, council member. My name is Eliane Martin. I'm the president of ASAP, a non-profit organization which takes care of the cats and abandoned and strays which are brought to the county shelter in Goleta. I was also a member of the task force. We met for 14 years, and we worked to come up with an ordinance which would be minimally intrusive on responsible pet owners, but yet effective. The question of cat licensing came up during our meetings, and we came up with the conclusion that it should be, the ordinance should be limited to unaltered cats. Licensing altered cats would punish the responsible pet owners whose cats do not contribute to the pet overpopulation. The underlying point of the ordinance is to promote responsible pet ownership, and owners of altered cats have already done that. Cat licensing would also impose have a huge impact on organizations taking care of feral colonies, and there are feral colonies within the city limits. And the good news is that the county's ordinance continues to help us in our work of reducing pet overpopulation. At ASAP, we keep seeing a decline. We have about 90 kittens less this year than we had last year. The county ordinance has allowed us to motivate people to do the responsible thing. Many organizations are available to help financially with free or low-cost surgeries, and we need the same tools to use on irresponsible pet owners in the city of Santa Barbara, who contributes to 44% of the animals brought to the shelter. So I urge you to drop the cat licensing from the city ordinance and adopt an ordinance that closely mirrors the one the task force came up on the county level.
Thank you very much.
And yes, the rabies certificate is 3 years for cats.
Thank you. And Lisa Kenyon to be followed by Risa Grimes.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Kenyon. I spent over 12 months on the Spay-Neuter Task Force. I've also been a lead volunteer adoption counselor with Santa Barbara County Animal Services for over 10 years. The task force did work long and hard and consulted with many experts before crafting the details of the county ordinance. My fellow members of the task force who voted in favor of the ordinance language has over 100 years of experience in the world of veterinary medicine, animal sheltering, and rescue as volunteers. I did Dr. Heller's comments as well as those of Ms. Martin's. The county ordinance is a minimally intrusive, easy to comply with, and easy to administer ordinance, which aligns with the pre-existing state, county, and city licenses for dogs, with the newer element and that of the licensing for unaltered cats. This is not a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance. The county ordinance is working. My recommendation is that the city of Santa Barbara adopt an ordinance as similar as possible to the county ordinance language. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grimes. Now Risa Grimes, followed by Shirley Jansen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Risa Grimes. I've been a local business owner for over 20 years, and I've been involved in local feral cat rescue for over 10, starting with a colony at my own place of business. We need something for unaltered cats in order to motivate cat owners to fix their cats. Otherwise, Too often they won't, even if free spay and neuter is offered. Altered cats are not the problem. We do not need to license them. It would put an undue burden on us who trap, neuter, and release cats to control the feral cat population. We cannot afford to license all the cats in the colonies that we manage, and it would be impossible to put collars and tags on them. We already pay for food and veterinary care, and this would be unfair and unaffordable for people engaged in responsible rescue and feral cat management. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask you a question about the feral cat population? I really don't know much about it. I haven't seen that many feral cats. At least I don't recognize them, obviously.
No, you usually don't. Usually they come out in the evening. I do mostly the unincorporated, well, not the unincorporated, the business district,
Right.
kind of between Rancheria and Milpas by the railroad tracks.
How do you recognize a feral cat? It's not a trap question. I'm curious. Is the one that comes back for milk all the time at your back door? Or?
No, they just come around. They slink around. You usually don't see them that often.
Right. And are they sometimes fixed, sometimes not?
We fix them all. Every single one that we find, we fix.
And the ones you encounter are usually unaltered?
Unaltered,
Okay.
yes.
Thanks.
Unaltered. But can I say one thing?
Please.
They didn't start out as feral cats.
Right.
They started out as regular household cats who went awry, had kittens. The kittens weren't socialized, and they just grow. Okay, so they started out by irresponsible people.
Yeah, I think sometimes they're just somebody moves and they leave their cat behind.
They do.
That awful.
They do.
Yeah.
They move. They leave them.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Another question for
Ms.
you,
Grimes?
Ms. Grimes.
I'm sorry, we're going to put you on a hot spot here. Would you give us just an idea? I mean, I honestly don't know either. What's the scope of the problem? I mean, talk to us a little bit about the number of unaltered cats or feral cat colonies. What's out there?
Myself, I do 9 colonies. There's at least 30 cats total in the 9 colonies, and I'm just one person. Catalyst, there's Catalyst who does tons of them. I guess I don't really know how many are out there. I know what I do and what I've done for the last 10 years. And it's 9 colonies, and right now it's about 30 cats. There's always ones coming in that are unaltered. Some kind of seem to be dumped because a lot of times they're tame and I can take them to ASAP, but most of the time I can't.
And when you say you take care of them, what do you do?
I feed them, I take them to the vet if need be, and I take them home if I have to. I've recently taken, well, in the last couple of years, I probably have taken 5 home. Because they're diabetics, they trust me, they're like regular cats to me, and I fed them for so long.
Okay, so then I sort of understand then the concern about you're having to get collars and tags and the
I
whole thing.
couldn't do it,
for
and
all.
it's kind of unsafe because, I mean, they have breakaway collars out there now, but these cats go under fences, they're running from people, they're under cars.
Okay.
If you don't put a breakaway collar on them, they're liable to get choked, strangled.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Shirley Jansen to be followed by Nikolai Lambert.
Well, first of all, the committee on which I also serve met for 14 months, not 14 years, while it did seem like 14.
It just felt like it, right?
I would like to point out that the differential in licensing fees is state law. It is not something that was arbitrarily selected by our committee. The differential is required by state law to be twice the fee for an altered animal. So that's state law. All that our task force did was to add a $10 surcharge to that, so in the hopes that that money could be used to provide spay-neuter services for those unable to provide it for their pets. In answer to the burden that it would place upon people who have multiple animals, I believe there was a local ordinance prohibiting anyone from having more than 3. So your 4-cat scenario would already be a violation. And I would beg for some consistency between county and city. Those of us who work in the shelters, every time someone comes in to adopt, we have to say, gee, is the 400 block on this street city or county, in order to charge a licensing fee or to determine whether or not there is a violation. That's going to set up a nightmare scenario in practice within the shelters. Many people have no idea whether they live in the city or county, don't care. So if we could have some sort of consistency, that would make all of our lives function a lot more smoothly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nikolai Lambert, to be followed by Peggy Langle.
Council members, you wish to draft an ordinance that would require that cats be altered and licensed. Well, cats tend to roam around neighborhoods. Even ones that have homes are taken care of. They roam around neighborhoods. They socialize with other cats. That's their behavior. They're not feral. They're not wild. They have homes. They're taken care of. People are making sure they're not being menaces to society by overpopulating. And then another thing, requiring a vet to sign off saying that you can have a dog unaltered. What kind of influence is the vet going to have to alter the dog? We should be able to have our animals altered or unaltered the way we choose to be. Some people choose to not alter their animals because they feel it's unnatural and takes the animal instinct out of the dog, out of the cat. I have had unaltered dogs before who were never aggressive. I have had unaltered cats before who are never aggressive. I have an unaltered dog right now, almost 9 years old. She's had one litter in 9 years. And that's nothing compared to a lot of irresponsible people out there with their unaltered animals. So to draft an ordinance requiring everybody do this, that'd be government getting in the way of civil liabilities, and we don't need that.
Thank you. Peggy Langle, to be followed by Janet Vining Mitchell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Peggy Langle. I'm the executive director of the Santa Barbara Humane Society. And I had the opportunity to review the draft ordinance from the city attorney's office that is being discussed today. Just some points as far as comments related to the draft ordinance is that our hope at the Santa Barbara Humane Society is that should this ordinance move forward, that a veterinary certificate be required upon not only the issuance of a license, but upon renewal of the license, because physical circumstances, heat cycles, age of the animal will change as time evolves. In addition, as far as the veterinary certificate, if that could be left out of the ordinance specifically as it relates to form and format, something that could be approved by city police department and the animal control supervisor, I think would be more realistic to meet the needs of the veterinary community. I think one of the last points is that with an ordinance amendment that we're considering today, adopting new provisions in an ordinance, I think the main goal for government is to look at what is the community standard and try to reach some means of consistency and conformity for the citizens of the city. And there is a community standard in place, and that community standard happens to be the responsible pet ownership ordinance in the unincorporated areas of the county. So as much as possible that this particular ordinance could mirror the county's ordinance, I think would cause less confusion for the residents of Santa Barbara City, cause the ability or allow for the ability of owners and veterinarians to know what kind of standard they need to achieve. Basically, the ordinance really, from an enforcement perspective, will be complaint-driven. In most cases, I think it's appropriate that we look at unaltered cat licenses only. It's very easy to see an unaltered cat in a confined situation environment with an investigation because usually a litter is present. And so it's very easy to be able to meet that criteria. And as another speaker said, typically you don't see a cat remaining on site when you get a call about a stray cat. So I do thank you for your time.
You have a couple of questions here.
I have questions. Thank you. I don't understand your point about form and format, police form, whatever, veterinarian form. Could you explain that again, please?
When when the specific content of a form is actually put into the ordinance, there's very little ability to modify the form content and format of a form. It's basically motionless. I mean, there is no, right. It is, as Chair White mentioned, it's law. It becomes law. And so I think it would be more helpful if the veterinarians and city animal control were able to develop the content of the form to meet the needs of the community.
Well, I think
Go ahead.
One of the fears is that it becomes overbearing. And if it's not said as what should be said as what the city attorney said, then we could start with one thing and end up with something entirely different, so that it does become mandatory as opposed to we're trying to make it optional, as it were, as close to option as possible. Anyway, that's a thought on that. Thank you.
House, do you have anything? I have a question, and that is Ms. Is it Martin rather than Martin? Okay. It said there are 90 kittens less that came in the last year. What percentage of is that 90 out of 900 versus, what kind of change in flow is a 90 kitten reduction?
I'm not sure. Actually, Eliana Martin would need to speak to that particular issue. She is referring to ASAP's population at the Santa Barbara Humane Society. We are already seeing a reduced number as well in our kitten population. We haven't really seen a kitten season this year. It's been sporadic. Our veterinary clinic on site, we've seen a large number of kittens being spayed and neutered at our on-site veterinary clinic in the numbers of hundreds, but I'm not sure about the population that Ms. Martin was speaking to.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Janet Bining-Mitchell to be followed by Ginny White. Hi, Janet.
Morning, or I guess it's afternoon, council members. I first want to say that I believe that the city attorney has done a commendable job in drafting this ordinance. I'm an attorney. I sat through all 14 months of the task force, and what the task force wrote, which was written by lay people, is vague, ambiguous, extremely poorly drafted. And I think that the city attorney correctly simplified it and made it clear exactly as to what is required. I also believe that the form should appropriately be in the ordinance because what has happened in the county is that you cannot get a copy of that form as a pet owner. In fact, they will not allow you to have it. And the wording of it, I demanded a copy, and I was sent one that had, draft all across it, not for use. They will only send it to vets. And so the wording to me was, it was played with, and it was altered because of the circumstances. And I don't think that's fair or reasonable to pet owners. I would also like to distribute to the committee and to the city attorney copies of exemptions to spay-neuter ordinances that exist in other jurisdictions that have adopted spay-neuter ordinances. It's very typical to exempt people from those ordinances. And I'd like to particularly point out Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz has a veterinary exemption that is similar to the one that was drafted by the city attorney. It basically says, I've seen this cat or dog, and, I've consulted with the owners, and they should have one. But they also have exemptions for service dogs, show dogs. And when you are talking about, basically what this is an educational ordinance. You want to make sure that the owners know what they're getting into. I would like to see the word responsibility added to the ordinance, that owners should be counseled not just to problems, because while there may be problems, the issue to me is the responsibility. Okay. And it's an educational ordinance, and certainly there are a lot of pet owners who have been educated, who are educated, service dog owners, show dog people. They know the consequences, they know the issues involved in owning an intact animal. So I think that it is appropriate. In the city of Lompoc, for example, there are exemptions. The city of Santa Cruz has exemptions, and I think it would be appropriate to have them in our ordinance.
If I may, obviously we just got handed this, so I didn't do very well in Evelyn Wood.
I'm sorry.
So in Lompoc, what would be the exceptions? There are a couple of exceptions in our.
I don't think there are any exemptions to having to obtain a vet certificate.
Okay.
In Lompoc, the exemptions are service dogs, show dogs, dogs under the treatment of animal hospitals or veterinary facilities, dogs for sale in licensed pet shops, people who own dogs owned by people who have a permit to have a kennel, and law enforcement dogs, and dogs certified by a vet as having a high risk of injury or death from the sterilization surgery. Okay. Los Angeles, both the city and the county have exemptions, and as I said, Santa Cruz has an exemption.
Great. Okay. Do you have anything, Mr. House?
I have a question for Ms. Mitchell. Thank you for supplying us with this list. And I appreciate use of the word educational ordinance and adding the word responsibility. We might be able to find ways to do that. But here's the question: And it says dogs in the city temporarily. I think that's already in there, isn't it, Mr. Wiley? That was in there. There was a temporary exemption. Yeah. But what's the what would they be exempt from? I mean, the conversation with the vet?
From having to have an extra vet visit. That's basically not needed. When you have people who have service dogs, they certainly are very well educated. When you have people who have show dogs exist for the purpose of breeding the best quality, healthiest animals.
I see.
I have owned. Okay,
I'm listening to you.
I'm a proud owner of intact show dogs that have been for the last 12 years, and I am, exceptionally aware of all of the issues and responsibilities that come with owning those dogs, as are all of the people who show their dogs. And we do it because we want healthy dogs.
Sure, understood. And you have to get the license and a renewal. You're not exempted from getting licenses, right?
Oh no, I have to license my.
And the rabies shots and all.
Well, rabies shots are state law.
Right.
For dogs, not for cats. Cats don't have to have rabies shots.
No, I'm just talking about dogs for a minute. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm looking for, and I appreciate this conversation, I'm looking for whomever that we somehow make sure that we have the cycles timed so that it's with the renewal or going to get the rabies shot or something, so that it doesn't add an extra burden for the dog owner at least, and that they could, if they're getting a certificate, it would only be because to certify they had that conversation.
And I think that that's appropriate because the city government should not be delegating to veterinarians who have their own standards whether a person can own an intact animal. It's, you provide, laws are designed to provide clear guidelines for people. The county ordinance does not. Having every veterinarian has their own opinion. I think that it is appropriate to have a veterinarian educate pet owners. That's what this ordinance is about. And I think that education occurring the first time the license is issued is entirely appropriate. I don't think it needs to happen over and over so that everybody, my dog's license expires in, I think it's like April, but the rabies certificate expires in August, so what do I do? When it comes up, I had to buy a 6-month license, which cost me more because it was actually, like 4 months, and then go in and to the vet again.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry, Janet, Mr. Hotchkiss has a question for you.
Hi, quick question. One of the Lompoc exceptions, sort of a temporary one, is it not? Because dogs on sale in licensed pet shops, the minute those are sold, then that new owner comes under different rules. And
Sure.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Ginny White.
I have this for the city attorney. You already want to give it to her? Thank you. This is a document that you already have that I gave you yesterday, plus on email. But I'll refer to a couple of things on it. First of all, I also commend the city attorney for writing a very good ordinance in that it's clear, it's workable, and although I always appreciate standardization, that's part of what I do in my professional career as a laboratory manager, is that I see no problem with taking what the county did and improving on it, which is what this is. And I think that you've given very good guidance to the city attorney, and it's a very good document. I would like to think that as the city makes a better and improved situation, the county could relook at theirs for standardization and make the same improvements as the city leads the way now to what is a better law. The only couple things I would just say about the wording in our ordinance is I also agree with adding the responsibility word and the educational word. I think that's a great aspect of where we are in this whole issue. And I think it's important that when the vet is speaking with the pet owner, that they talk about the things with the issues with having an unaltered dog. At least I think it's different for cats. Having rescue cats myself, is that they talk about the pros and cons of having an altered and unaltered dog. It's not that there's just problems. There are actually problems by altering your dog. The idea is the vet, who is the expert on the issue, will be talking with the person to give them the best information they can on which to make a sound decision. And I think that that's what the attorney was trying to do here, and I would just, reinforce that. I think also...
Need to wrap up.
Thank you. The idea with the timing is also good here, that it's once for, because since it's an educational process, it doesn't matter really, honestly, if it changes, because the education stays the same as long as it's one dog with the same owner.
Good point.
Thank you very much.
Now, I do have a question for you, though, however, and that is on cats. Do you support the licensing of all cats?
I hear all the comments on this, and I would support definitely licensing the unaltered cats, and then I would leave it up to what's workable for the altered.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. I don't have any more speaker slips. Anybody else want to speak that hasn't spoken? And I'll close the public portion of the meeting, and it's back to the committee. Mr. House?
Mr. Chair, first of all, I appreciate everyone coming out, and I've taken these notes here. Looking at what the attorney has given us today, and then also looking at these suggested changes that Dr. Heller brought, I think I'd like, because she has both the language that was recommended and that we have for discussion today and some suggestions. Lori, is it possible for us to use an opaque copy like this on the projector over there and put it up on the screen? Could we do that? And Mr. Chair, what I'd like to do, because it's not that long, I mean, this is not a real complicated ordinance, is to go through the language and just look at it based and take into consideration some of the comments that we've heard. And maybe we can, move through this at least pretty quickly and see what we can do to tailor this or get it down as close as we can to something that's approvable. Let's see. Here's a copy. Let's see. Let's make sure this is marked up. Yes, that's it. Thanks. And that would give us a chance to have something to look at. There were some of the stuff is just form changes and it isn't substantive. But some of it is pretty important, and we could go through it maybe.
Okay, and I'm game to do that, but I want to give Mr. Hotchkiss a chance to say something if you'd like to do that before we... Should we do that? Okay, great.
My sense is that the issues that we're going to be discussing are going to come up in the process of this.
All right.
And then we would be making some headway. So, if I understand correctly, is that it? Hold on. Yes, there you go. I think there was a section 1, 2, that part at the top, let me be sure I've got the right one, isn't so important. I'm going down to where it says section 3 and the first paragraph there. And it appears that, the mandatory license requirement altered dogs, there's a title change. And most important, I think, is this next part that is struck out and I guess partly moved. And so when I look at this, there's just a general idea of purchasing a license, particularly in this case for dogs. And then the part that's replacing it is a license shall only be issued if the rabies vaccine is current through the entire licensing period. This is something we didn't discuss before that I recall, but I think it's a requirement of some sort that you have to do that anyway.
That's in the city ordinance now, in fact.
Is it? It's just moving it into this place? It's movement?
It's already there.
Okay, and so then that's just a matter of putting it in that place. Then it looks to me like there's a even treatment between altered dogs and unaltered dogs. There's a place for each on the B and C. The mandatory license requirement, altered dogs, and then the distinction between that and unaltered dogs. In the event the animal is to be licensed, has been spayed or neutered, a written statement from a licensed veterinarian certifying that the animal has been spayed or neutered must be presented at the time the license is obtained in order to qualify for a reduced fee. So that's just moved around. Okay, that's I just wanted we might find this is easier than we think. On the unaltered dogs, then there's a little bit of change in language there, and this is where the issue of whether it's just the first time only or if it's going to be as the license is renewed, I think first comes up here in that first line. And we can discuss this. It said of the first is struck out, of a license to the dog. So that would be the time at which the requirement kicks in. And a substitute there and a form to be determined. That was the discussion we were just having. I know that there was, as I was looking at this, there was an example of what the county already has, but the county's had some language where the veterinarian, this is what Mr. Wiley was saying, where the veterinarian is actually approving, if you will, making a statement of approval. And Mr. Wiley, would you help us for a minute? Don't we usually leave fees and forms to something that follows an actual ordinance, that we have a process to do that separate from the creation of the actual ordinance? Or do we do the forms as part of the ordinance?
Councilmember House, fees definitely, that's in the fee resolution, but forms, no. I wouldn't say there's any, we don't typically have a lot of city forms referenced in the code, but I will tell you my reaction, that's pretty much the heart of this ordinance, is what the form says, as it is in the case of the county. And it's a very substantive decision that the ordinance committee and ultimately the council will probably need to want to make. I don't see a way to say we're just going to duck the key issue in this ordinance and let the animal there. And by the way, there is no longer a city animal control supervisor, and let the police department word the form. That's the heart of what we're talking about here. But I mean, you could do that, I suppose.
Okay.
Maybe we take a moment to discuss this.
All right. And then, Mr. Hotchkiss, you're like you.
No, I said before that I think what it says has to be specific and not alterable. We have to settle on that. And Mr. Wiley's point I thought was excellent, whereas it's an education, as somebody said, and not an instruction. We're not telling you that you should do this or even words to that effect. We're just saying this is educationally the pros and cons that somebody stated, so it's a neutral position. Otherwise, I think we do start to get into what people have called a mandatory requirement, and you know, the group that sat for 14 years, Elian, divided evenly on this issue. This was very important, so I know that there are passions on both sides, and I'd like to respect them. So that's why I think the neutrality is very important, how we do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I was looking at the county's ordinance and looking at the recommended language that our attorney has put together for us, and then listening to what people have been talking about. Like, for instance, the certificate is to certify that so-and-so DVM has discussed the potential, and we had some suggestions on language. It says potential problems which may arise in keeping and properly maintaining. So the word responsibility, it could very well belong there. In other words, the responsibilities associated with. And I think potential problems doesn't mean that there are problems. Potential problems which may arise in keeping and in responsibly maintaining a dog or cat would get to the heart of it right there, that has not been spayed or neutered with the owner of the dog or cat. The owner's name would go in there. I'm saying this out loud so we can discuss it. Right. Okay. I think the only place where it became a little problematic was the requirement to provide the following informational materials. But I think it was more like that the person has provided the owner with some material to take home. Mr. Wiley, you had a little concern that we didn't know whether certain materials existed. There was an assumption of some sort. Perhaps, Ms. Langle, what kind of materials are available that would be helpful, or is that really not so important or pertinent to this whole idea of education for somebody who might own an unaltered dog or cat?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember House, I think it would be better for Lisa Kenyon, who is a staff member of County Animal Services, who has developed some of those educational materials, perhaps to address that particular issue.
Ms. Kenyon? On the spot? Come on up. All right, well, please come up and speak into the mic in whatever capacity you're speaking. Speak into the mic.
Just for the sake of my boss, I'm on my own time right now.
Right, thank you.
That's on the record.
So we have developed within the county materials that are easy to understand in both English and Spanish. I think council may have been provided this by Dr. Heller, but it does indicate some of the whys and the what-fors on spay-neuter. That might be a particular document that would be of help for the veterinarians to provide that could be used across the county.
I see. So there is material that would be available, and we wouldn't be requiring the specific material, Mr. Wiley. It would be just a place to identify what kind of materials were being distributed to the person. Right.
But it certainly helps that there is something available already to start with.
Is that basically neutral, would you say, or is it a proponent, an advocacy document, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I consider it neutral. But I recognize it's my opinion. Right, and somebody else may not. A lot of this material was actually pulled off American AVMA, CVMA, so source documents from the veterinary community themselves to come up with something that kind of hits all the main points with regard to how does spaying and neutering help, what is the best age, what is the pet overpopulation, where can I find out about affordable spay-neuter? Okay, rather than get into the specifics, which we could go on forever, maybe we just want to say the educational, both pros and cons of spaying and neutering.
Okay.
Would that be agreeable to you?
I think the generalized language like that gets us to the same point. I think, and Mr. Wiley can take notes as we move along here. Okay, very good. Now I got to find out where I left off. Okay, good. And then so the language has it goes down further, and it talks on this in this draft that's on the board or up on the wall there. It shifts away from the animal has been specified prior to issuance by the city of first license that dog. That's gone in this version. It says a license shall only be issued if the rabies vaccine is current. We talked about that, and all that's required. Okay, good. And now we're down to altered.
Yeah, that's an
There may be, okay, let's just keep on going down. Let's see. And then the bottom is consulted with the veterinarian. Veterinarian certificates required. All that is boilerplate in our current veterinarian certificates valid. Let's go to the next page. Failure to qualify. Oh, that was, I think, what Dr. Heller brought up. And this had to do with the kind of situations where someone wouldn't qualify for an unaltered dog license. And it had, there were three specific things here, and
okay, I'm going to back up 1 second, Mr. House, because we had the Mr. Wiley's point about the form, and that's in that previous page, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of one of the heart of the matter situations here, and I'm game to support us providing the form. I appreciate that some of our advocates today want the form to be subject to the animal control folks doing it, but I'm willing to support it being part of what we deliver as a draft ordinance to.
I'm certainly okay if it was what we just discussed.
Right.
I see.
I mean, well, I presume this will come back again to us, right, and we'll have the specifics of it to work with. But since that's one of the key points, and we're having this discussion, I just wanted to put that out on the table.
Yeah, and I think that at this point we've got some concurrence here between all three of us, and I see people in the audience more at least doing this.
Yeah. That's a good thing.
Okay, and the bottom of that page was consulting with the veterinarian, which we just discussed. And then on the next page, we have this D, failure to qualify for unaltered dog license, and there were three things.
We're jumping one thing that's important.
What's that?
Here it says, regarding a current veterinary certificate is required each time.
Okay, right.
And that means that every time, as opposed to what Mr. Wiley wrote, that somebody would go in for a lecture.
Right.
And that's the key point, whether it's
one time or multiple.
Yeah, I think it's educational and it's once.
Right. Okay.
What do you think, Mr. Howes?
I tend to think that it should be when there's at the same time. I don't know how we get these things to synchronize, but at the same time as a renewal or a rabies shot, whatever those are required. And so if somebody does have a 3-year, if there's a 2-year or a 3-year license, they would only have to get a little certificate from the veterinarian that they had this conversation once every 2 or 3 years. I think that that's important to keep it fresh, and the dog's condition may change. And so I'm tending to think that, I mean, again, this is really pretty innocuous. This is not a really intense requirement to have a conversation with the vet about this. So that's where I'm at.
You're a repeat lecture guy.
Right, repeat lecture.
Berating them, no, but repeat lecture guy.
Okay, and so, and one of my questions to our staff is, Sergeant Harwood, is do we have are we doing 3-year license, or we just do 2-year? And yet we can have, okay.
I can answer that question.
Let our staff answer that. I'm on the right topic, I can see that, so, okay, let's.
We just recently changed to licensing periods of 1 year or 2 years. That started August 1st when we finally made the transition to pet data to outsource our licensing. That was supposed to start July 1st. It actually happened August 1st. So we no longer sell 6-month licenses. The decision to do 1 year and 2 year licenses, and my predecessors were involved in that, but it's been communicated to me that the primary reason for the 1 year and 2 year periods was that it made it easiest for pet data and for us to facilitate this transition. If we deemed it absolutely necessary, we could go to a 3-year or resume a 6-month licensing as well.
Okay, so the 3-year is what matches up to some of the vaccine rhythms. Is that right? That could work. Okay.
And what I liked
another-
about what was here was it was, or longer. I go with the idea that it shouldn't be like, it shouldn't have to be every single year. I mean, it would be great if it would really tie in with the the rabies vaccine. And I think there might be some benefit to considering having our licensing be in that same kind of a cycle as well. I don't know. We're not here to discuss that exactly, but
I would concur with that. In the brief period of time where I handled the license, where we city staff managed all of that, I did see a lot of confusion, particularly among some of the elderly clients that we have and others, in just getting all of those materials that were required into us in an appropriate manner. So I would concur with the need for there to be some consistency in this process.
that'd be really nice if that could be sort of a tangential outcome of our conversation here, because it would make it easier for everyone to get all those things in sync.
And if I may add, I think it concurs, but the fewer visits that are necessary, the less cost for the pet owner, too. So that's a consideration.
And the paper chase on, if we have the ability to keep the data, which it sounds like we do now.
Good.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I think we're in concurrence that the less the better, but I think tying it, if we can somehow tie it with the cycle of the rabies requirement, then that's a visit they have to do anyway.
Should.
Okay, so
okay.
And I would support the repeat lecture as long as we're headed towards the 3-year. I think it's important that we have that as the again a trade-off. It's less often, and so that's good. That accomplishes one of our common goals. Yeah. We're okay. Well, now I'm just trying.
Okay, we'll move to D
okay.
then. Just to keep
Moving
it
to D.
In D, there are 3 disqualifiers, basically. It's a failure to qualify. One is dogs impounded and or cited for being at large 3 times or more in 1 year. And the second is dogs and the owners of which have been convicted in California for crimes against animals or domestic violence. There must be some research that supports that connection. And 3, dogs which have been determined to be vicious per Section 16 or 612.030 of this title. And I would look to our staff to give us some feedback as to whether there's that is makes sense there. I kind of it does to me as a layperson, but
Mr. Chair,
I don't understand the
Councilmember
domestic
House,
violence portion myself, but
I doubt we can do that under state law. We just, for example, can't create additional penalties beyond the penalties already in state law. People basically, by the courts, are considered to have a right to own a pet. And, I don't know that we can regulate through our licensing what we're trying to do here, whether they're altered or unaltered. But we can't add additional penalties. For example, been convicted of a crime of domestic violence or violence against an animal. We can research it, but I seriously doubt that state law is going to allow us to do that sort of thing, or to really add some of these arbitrary and conclusionary things. To say someone, you've been cited or your dog's been impounded 3 times and therefore you can't have an unaltered pet, I don't think that's legal.
Okay, very good. Just for the sake of knowing from where that came, because I don't know where that, would you mind if I asked Dr. Heller to just ask,
you can
inform us?
Yeah.
Do you mind letting, no, to the front, please?
Come up to the mic.
I just
Recognizing we're at 19 minutes
we're
and
moving,
counting.
We're doing
Right.
pretty good here.
Okay.
I talk fast, you know that. County Council extensively researched this because it's in the county ordinance. It's also in the ordinances of several other communities that have mandatory spay-neuter laws. And there is a law working its way through the state legislature right now which would deny people the right to an unaltered license if their animal's found at large even once.
Okay,
so there's been very extensive research on the legalities.
So this is in the county's ordinance right now?
Yes.
Okay, maybe we could have our attorney review that between now and the time it comes back.
I will tell you whether it's in the county ordinance or not really will not affect our decision. The statement that there's someone's attempting to amend
Are you on?
tells me everything
Yeah.
about whether
Is your mic
it's
on?
legal.
Okay.
Your mic on?
Okay.
You just can't create things like this contrary to state law. You can't. There is a pretty basic right to own a pet, and this is not what this item was agendized to discuss.
Thank you, sir. We got it. Let's move to, if it's all right, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Keep moving. That was pretty clear response. We'll go to a license period of validity, and we were just talking about that, I think, just a moment ago. This identifies, it says a license shall be purchased. I put issued. We've been using the word issued throughout in my mark on that second line. But a license shall be purchased or issued for either a 6-month, 12-month, or 3-year. We need to work with our staff to get the right numbers in there concurrent with the cycles that we offer. Would that be, could you help us with that then, maybe?
Yes,
Sergeant Harvard?
I don't see any reason why going to 1 year and a 3-year period like the county would be a good thing to do.
Okay.
I would be reluctant to start up the 6-month license.
Yeah, that's the reason I said that. We might want to get our cycles in
So
there.
1 year and 3 year.
Well, whatever it is we really have in the city should be there.
We don't have a 3-year now, right?
No, we have 1 year and 2 year right now.
Right. So we want to put in a 3-year.
3. Okay, good. And then moving down past F to G, I think there was a striking of the word possible. It was just penalties for failure to comply. And there was an addition. Failure to comply with the provision of subsections A and B of this section may result in the impoundment of the dog or a fine or both, which is in the recommended language. And then the fine for failure to comply shall be established by resolution of the City Council. Mr. Wiley? Or maybe that's just given.
We've already got a maximum fine in the municipal code of $1,000 for any municipal code violation.
Okay.
And that, of course, only happens if there's been a conviction, and it can only be imposed by a judge. That's the way fines work.
Okay, and do we need to specify the particular fine? I mean, would the council identify a specific fine after the resolution and the ordinance has been passed for this?
No, what I'm saying is there's a general fine
I see.
provision for any violation of municipal code that the maximum is $1,000.
Clear.
And actually, that's in the charter as well. I mean, you could make a lesser amount, the maximum fine, but you couldn't go, at this point, without changing the charter, you couldn't go above that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good. In Section 3, we talk about cats.
Okay, maybe we should, on that, are we good to strike that then?
I suppose, if we've already got it in our...
I have a question. This really isn't the way to do an ordinance.
That's not a question, that's a comment.
I've never seen this draft. I don't even know what these showing changes are showing changes
Okay.
from.
All right.
I would prefer if the committee could direct me on substantive issues, and I'll redraft the ordinance.
Perfect. We'll do it.
I'm hearing some, consensus on substantive issues,
Good.
but I'm not at all inclined to recommend we use this draft as something, because it's,
That's fair.
That's great.
Well, good enough.
This is good. This is another piece of guidance to then give us opportunities to give you substantive direction. And that's all we're doing.
I think Mr. Wiley's saying that he's the lawyer, and we ought to respect that, and I agree with that. So let's give him direction. Mr. Howes, go ahead with your other thoughts.
Then I'll complete, I'll do that way then. On the next piece that's on this particular piece of suggestion here, it talks about the cat issue, and it focuses on the unaltered cats rather than all cats. And I agree completely with that. I think we should just do unaltered cats, not licensing of all cats. Right. And I think the language that's in this is helpful to that. And it has language that mirrors the dog part that we just talked about. And let's see if there's... and then at the very end in this Section 4, there was some... there was this idea that the license itself, because people breed animals, and it appears that the language talks about the license, the unaltered license, is fundamentally a breeding permit. And so I would like our council to review that language and see how that would work consistent with our...
Well, let's talk about what's the point? What's the substance that you're talking about? What do you want to see there, Mr. House?
Okay, very good. I want to make sure that what we're doing is facilitates the interests and rights of the breeding community, those who would breed animals for profit or for whatever reason, at the same time as fulfilling this educational interest that we have in coming forward with this ordinance. So when I look at these, the specifics in this Section 4 and the surcharge, which we did not have before, but it was in the county's piece, there was a balance there. And the one was actually identifying the license and the relationship with the breeding as a breeding permit. Secondly, there was a surcharge that was identifying that $10 fee that then is used as a furtherance of the educational component, and that is in the county's ordinance. It would be a consistent thing, and it would be very helpful for expanding the educational effort. And then lastly, there were some definitions. And
yeah, I'm not sure it was for the educational guy. It was for people who couldn't afford it. Yeah, it wasn't.
Well, it's okay, but it actually gets to people who otherwise couldn't possibly.
Well, the question is, do we have that $10 charge or not? We'll have to discuss that. I don't know.
Well, let's discuss it.
Okay, I support it.
Okay. Mr. Hotchkiss?
Let's keep moving on.
You said you don't want to comment on whether you support that or not?
And I think there are more important things right now.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll support it.
Okay, and so then at the very end, there's a few other things, definitions and such, and I'm not going to dwell on those. Those are things that our council can look at and make sure that they fit. And they're just suggestions that came up after the last meeting.
I don't have this.
No, this is for after today's meeting,
Right.
Mr. Wiley.
Okay, but you're directing me to look at some things that I don't know what it is that I'm. For this fee and the surcharge, I didn't follow that at all. So
Okay.
Maybe you can direct
Okay,
me later, but
Okay.
Well,
Wiley, let me be specific. In the county ordinance, there's a $10 surcharge that's used to assist people who are, the funds are used to actually assist people who otherwise couldn't afford this in terms of spay and neutering. It goes into a fund. And then it's as...
Who is surcharged?
Those
unaltered pet licensees.
That's right. Those who...
So
right.
that's set at a certain amount plus $10?
Right.
It's just set at $10. In other words, in the county ordinance, they have, one of the recommendations was a $10, they called it a surcharge, and it was to be deposited, and it is being deposited, into a spay and neuter fund to be used for such services as educational outreach and spay and neuter subsidies. This is to take into consideration the concern that's had for people who have modest means, who would have a difficult time with any costs associated with spaying and neutering. So that's in the county ordinance, and it was in this marked up draft.
Still not clear on one thing. Who is surcharged?
The unaltered pet licensee.
So it's 100 plus another 10.
Right.
And then it goes into a special fund.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, and that's the end of my comments. And I think then, to be fair to our attorney, we'll make sure that you have a copy of this bunch of suggestions here, and then when we meet again, we'll have a chance to see what you come up with.
Could I ask, if we've got time, is there a consensus that this would only apply to unaltered cats? The licensing requirement would only apply to unaltered cats?
Yes.
Okay. And recognizing that the actual in the field enforcement is going to be probably nothing.
Nil.
No. Yeah.
Right.
Is there a consensus then on the certificate, how often an owner would have to get a certificate?
Okay, I'm game to go with the 3-year, or with 3 year.
With the renewal, and that again, we're in the recommendation with support from staff is to associate that with the rabies requirement, which is a state requirement.
Right.
Yeah, and which sometimes is 1 year initially,
Right.
and then extends to 3 years.
Right.
Right. So yes, agreed. Clear?
Yeah. I suppose we could simply cross-reference that you'd have to get it any time you had to get a rabies certificate. But if it is true that you have to get a rabies certificate like after that first year, we could say the first certificate's good for 3 years and then coincides with the rabies certificate thereafter.
We're going to need some help, I think, from our staff.
Mr. Harwood?
If I might add, I think there is some benefit to keeping a 1 year period. We do have many pet owners that have elderly pets, and it's just not practical for them to pay for a 3-year license in that circumstance.
So they would have that option.
Yes.
I hear that. That sounds good to me.
I agree too. And again, keeping it as simple as possible. When they have that 1 year or 3 years,
Well,
perfect.
I don't think that concern applies if you coincide it with the rabies certificate.
Right.
You don't get to choose not to get a rabies certificate or a license.
Right.
So if we have it coincide with the rabies certificate, even if you only want to get you have to do it.
Right.
It's
You follow me?
flexible, in fact, that way.
Yes.
I like
So
that.
I'll have the certificate coincide with whenever you have to have a rabies certificate.
Okay.
Yes, we will never issue a license for a pet that is not vaccinated.
Okay.
That's excellent. That's
All right.
Just a quick. I know this is something you haven't seen, but I don't know if you gentlemen agree with the so-called Lompoc exceptions, but they seem to be pretty good to me. I haven't studied them, but at least worthy of consideration. Have you looked at that, Mr. House?
Well, I just read it real quickly because I did take Evelyn Wood and did real well in it there, Mister. But
Okay.
yes, I'm messing with you.
So did you pass?
Well, I actually did very well. I couldn't get through being a city council member without it, to be honest with you. But in any case, I don't know what it's an exemption from exactly. I think it's not a mandatory it's not a mandatory spay and neuter ordinance. In which case, those exemptions in the other ordinances are to exempt you from the mandatory spay and neuter. In this case, we're not mandating spay or neutering, and so the exemption is only an exemption from a conversation from the vet once every rabies shot.
Well, no, possibly a cost too, and an extra visit. So if you're raising 20 dogs under a license, you don't have to be paying extra money for those before you sell them. I think that's one of the points here. But once those are sold, they become subject to all the laws or restrictions that you proposed.
And the extra money that you'd be saving would be
All sorts of money you're going to pay to a vet, and the $10 fee that you just...
it would be the $10 surcharge only.
Surcharge and all that stuff. This is expensive.
These dogs would have to be licensed if they're for sale, but they...
Not until they're sold.
Dogs for sale do not need to be licensed?
That's correct, as I understand it. And once they're sold...
Is that true?
I'm only guessing that most of those dogs are going to be under 4 months, and that's why, because a dog that's younger than 4 months doesn't have to have a license.
Right, okay.
So,
Well, rather than go forever on this, maybe the staff could look at this and come up with some recommendations. They look good to me, but I haven't closely examined them, even though I didn't take Evelyn Wood. So
I'd like to hear from Ms. Langle on this. She seems very eager to contribute to this part.
Ms. Langle?
Mr. Chair, council members,
down to
actually,
6 minutes.
it's on a separate point. If we could have the veterinary certificate, the length of time that is good for, tied to when the license is issued, not when the rabies
And
vaccine
why are
is
you
given.
arguing?
Because it's very specific. People will get their dogs and cats rabies vaccinations whenever it is comfortable for them to do so. So if you're talking about something that is related to a regulatory act, it should be tied to not when the vet gives the rabies shot, but when the city animal control issues a license.
But could the person who had the conversation when the rabies shot was given provide that certificate when they go for their license?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember House, the point that is actually being missed is that a vet will not give a veterinary certificate that says this expires in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It's up to city animal control to determine upon issuance of a license how long that veterinary certificate is good for. So that could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, but upon the presentation of the certificate of sterilization or a veterinary certificate or a rabies certificate, all of those items constitute when city animal control actually issues a license. So if that could be tied to the veterinary certificate basically is good at the time of licensing.
It would have to be valid at the time of licensing. But
Right,
It could have
and it could have been issued 6 months prior to that by
Associated
a
with-
veterinarian, and it wouldn't matter for purposes of issuing the license, but it's just that you're talking about the regulatory act of issuing the license, not when a veterinarian gives a rabies vaccine.
Okay. So we need to work on how long that
The
certificate is.
veterinary certificate could be good for as long as the license period is.
That was what I was saying.
Good.
That
I like
we
the
control
treatment.
the license.
Okay.
Those rabies certificates expire on
Right.
some basis, regular
Right.
basis. When your rabies certificate has expired, the next time you get a license, then you're also going to need a vet certificate if you've got an unaltered animal. So,
Okay.
I think we're all saying the same thing.
Good.
Yeah.
I like that. All right. All right. So we've had an interesting conversation here. We've gotten through everything. We've talked about the substantive issues. Mr. Wiley, did you have a sense of an area where you're unclear on whether we agree?
No, I other than the wording of the certificate, I guess, which I think I'm clear on what you're asking.
Good. Maybe review the tape, because I think we got pretty close there.
Okay. Then if that was in a consensus, I did hear what you said.
Yeah, I think it is a consensus with me objecting only to the minor thing, and it's not to go to the mattresses with, that people be re-educated every time. I think that's redundant. I would just give them I think
One time.
in effect, what the vet's going to say is, well, you remember we talked last time, they're going to say, yeah, okay, it hasn't changed, you're out of there.
Right.
So, big
Okay.
deal.
All right. Good. Well,
Do
with
you need
that,
a motion to continue this, or what would be
yes,
the best?
I think we.
Send it back to...
Yeah, but do you need a motion to
We'll
continue?
just, I don't think so. We'll just bring it back as soon as we can.
Okay.
Depending on your schedule. It'll be probably at least 3 weeks. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for showing up. I hope that you feel heard, and I certainly learned a few things today, and I hope I think we've improved the draft that was presented to us. So we'll look forward to seeing the next round. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.